What if darkness could be personified? What if the end wasn't devils rising from hell or angels descending from heaven, but a wave so massive, so destructive, so black that it would put out the very stars in the sky. It would consume the night itself and leave only a speck of cold blue. When there are no more angels in heaven and no more devils in hell, what is left in the void is pure darkness, a lifeless black flame. And on the front lines of Armageddon, the BPRD would make their stand or die. To understand the origins of the beast, we must first venture back to its earliest host, Raymond Distel. It would begin in 1910. Young Raymond would be on a field trip to a Berlin museum exhibit on Babylonian artifacts, where he would see his first vision of a black goddess, the very one we know as Hecate. Nothing would come of this for a long time until he got older and served in the Imperial German Navy as a petty officer on the SMS Emden in Tsingtao. The battles that took place during World War I were perilous, so much so that it was called the War to End All Wars, a land, air, and sea conflict so terrible it left over 8 million military personnel and 6.6 million civilians dead. When their ship reached the Cocos Islands, Raymond was assigned to a landing party to destroy a British wireless station and communications facility. The mission, however, went topside, and the Emden was discovered and destroyed by an Australian cruiser. The landing party evaded capture and made their way to the Dutch port of Padang, where they put together a way to be transported to the Ottoman Empire. But with all that he had seen and the hell he'd been through prior to these devastating events, Raymond deserted the war effort. He traveled to Siam, where he spent several years in opium dens, high on drugs and wasted off of alcohol, before eventually becoming a local guide and an acquaintance to a woman by the name of Sarah Jewell, a paranormal investigator who, in 1923, hired him to help her find missing girls that were abducted by a cult. Their journey would bring them to find the Temple of the Black Flame. When they reached the temple, though, all would not be as it seems. The cultists performing their sacrifice of a young girl would turn their sights to Raymond himself, and it is here that he finds out that he is the true key to their ritual. He saves the young girl, who he finds out is named Kamala, but as a result is imbued with the powers of the Black Flame. In her dreams, the Black Goddess would come to Kamala and tell her that she must support Raymond, both as a spouse and a teacher, to help him fulfill his destiny. And during the next couple of years, the two of them would learn and grow together and face many a foe in the process, including Lobster Johnson. In 1932, the Black Flame and Kamala were hired by the mob boss Arnie Wald, whose goal was to use their power to terrorize a neighborhood filled with lower working class people so that the land could be purchased cheaply. This in turn would help him in the long run when the city seeks to build freeways in the area. Raymond used his powers to set fire to the buildings, but was confronted by Lobster Johnson. It was here that Raymond would learn that he was unaffected by gunfire, and in the battle between them, one of the Lobster's closest companions, Massimo, was burnt to death, and his body later abducted by the enemy. Kamala used this corpse to gather any knowledge she could about the Lobster, and with this newfound edge in battle, the Black Flame, along with Arnie Wald and their crew, invaded the Lobster's headquarters, and with his destructive powers, he burned down everything in his path. He was seemingly unstoppable until the Lobster shot a high-caliber shell from a cannon square into his chest. As Ryman lay almost lifeless on the ground, Kamala came to his aid and began to sing. But as her vocals began to breathe life back into his body, a car rammed into her, killing her instantly. In that moment, Ryman rushes to her side and utters one final word, "Klein," before falling to the ground. With his flames diminished, only a shell of a man remained. Ryman is last seen being taken away by the police and spending the rest of his time in a prison cell in Hofitz Castle in Germany under the order of Paul von Hindenburg. It would take over a decade for him to be freed again by none other than Adolf Hitler. And in September of 1944, the Black Flame was ordered to capture the experimental XFW-12, also known as the Flying Wing, a new kind of fighter plane the Americans were testing. It was America's very own Sledgehammer, a well-known World War II hero, who did battle with Ryman one last time, to what would end in an explosion and leave his remains scattered into the ether of the world, only for Nazis to recover them. Things would remain quiet for quite a while, over 60 years in fact, and at the turn of the century, a man by the name of Landis Pope, head of the Zinco Corporation, would emerge. The Zinco Corporation has many roots in the universe, dating all the way back to the 1930s. They are a massive, globe-spanning organization with connections, resources, and equipment all around the world, including being a weapons manufacturer for the BPRD, and at one point being under the foot of Rasputin during the events that caused Hellboy's emergence on Earth. Landis Pope wasn't the type of man who sought power the traditional way. He had a different idea in mind when it came to the powers of the Okjuhim and the frog monsters. He would go on to task his entire R&D department to focus on studying the frog monsters, learning about biology and natural habits instead. The knowledge through the research they conducted allowed Landis to both speak to the frogs and control them. For the purpose of safety, the Zinco Corporation developed a black suit that would allow him to get up close and personal with his new companions. The mechanisms in his suit cast a blue flame upon his helmet, which mimicked the mysterious aura of the Black Flame. Landis would then actively move to start gaining more power and knowledge. He fired all of his chairmen and then proceeded to conduct a ritual from a piece of occult text, which took the soul of a frogman and transferred it into his own, a process that evolved his very being into the new, true Black Flame, and the conduit to the power of Kathahem. Kathahem was one of the 369 Okjuhim who, as you all may know by now, are the children of the Okju Jihad. Kathahem is one of the most significant Okjuhim in that he could alter the shape of non-living objects with his very breath. If you were to take anything away from knowledge of this beast, it's that where Saruhem's emergence signified the beginning of the plague of frogs and their place upon this planet, Kathahem signified the very change in nature itself, down to the most minute biological level. In short, he is the terraformer of life itself. Alas, like all foolish men too smart for their own good, Landis will come to find out that his place in the grand scheme of the universe and its plans was but a stepping stone to something far greater than himself. He found that the Black Flame was nothing more than a tool to light the way, a beacon of destruction for Kathahem, and that his research and devotion to the frog monsters was nothing but hollow nonsense, for he never had control over them in the first place. And as his world began to fall around him, the frogmen strung him up on a post and paraded him around before the stars to guide Kathahem to this realm. Here, Carthahem could begin his path of destruction, and Landis would plead and beg to be released, but it would be to no success. And his final thoughts in this moment were that after all he'd done, after all he sacrificed, he had been ultimately forsaken. Pope survived what he thought would be his final moments on Earth, and his body became bound with his suit, cementing him even further as the new Black Flame. In the depths of Earth, Landis would run across a figure known as the King of Fear, the leader of a subterranean race of people wiped out centuries prior. He would forge an alliance with the King of Fear, and together they created a machine that could transfer the spirits of the Ogdruhim directly into the frog monsters. He also began to encourage the frog monsters to breed in order to flesh out their numbers, in hopes to unleash them onto the world once again. Abe and Liz led a team deep into the earth to track him down, but they were captured by the King of Fear, who was promised the world itself once Landis took it all back. In an odd turn of events, Landis welcomed them to his lair with open arms and treated them as guests, which irritated the King of Fear, who refused to see them as anything other than prey. The truth was, Pope never intended on working with the King of Fear. His promises were empty, and Landis will go on to try to convince Abe of his true destiny as the new race of man, and that it was up to him to usher in the new age. But Abe fought against this notion, and in the middle of their conversation, the King of Fear objected to Landis and his plans, which resulted in Landis killing him on the spot. Having heard enough of his nonsense, Liz used her powers to completely destroy Landis and the remaining frog monsters in a massive explosion, destroying Pope's body, but in turn allowing his spirit to reside within the Ogdru Jihad in their crystalline prison. As things began to settle down, the BPRD took in their victory, while other forces would make their moves behind the scenes. Isaiah Marston, Landis' second-in-command, set out to revive him using the resources of the Zinco Corporation. It would be here that Cronin, Rasputin's top scientist, and Leopold Kurtz would make their return. Marston roped them in by making them think they were reviving Rasputin using a bioengineered humanoid body they received from the BPRD. This body was used by Johann in past missions to provide an edge in more physical paranormal encounters. And when the BPRD was attacked by Ben Daimio, the were-jaguar, Johann protected his friends, but lost the body in the process, causing it to be damaged and eventually stored away. They managed to pull Pope's soul back to Earth and insert it into the body. Through this, Pope was able to once again manifest into the Black Flame, one final time. And this time, he would be stronger than anything the BPRD had ever faced before. It wasn't long after that the worst would happen. Landis would summon forth dozens upon dozens of Ogdruhim from beneath the earth to destroy humanity and truly begin the end of days. All over the world, people began to evacuate as major cities fell. Militaries combined forces and did all they could to take on this monstrous threat, but they could only do so much. And in the ruins of New York City, Landis will sit upon his dark throne, proud of his works. It would be here that the BPRD would send an assault force consisting of only two people, the only two people who could ever come close to stopping him, Liz Sherman and Johann Kraus. To Johann's benefit, he has stumbled upon the remains of the sledgehammer armor, the very same that did battle with the previous Black Flame all those years ago. He knew that if he had possessed the armor, he could no longer get out, and major damage to it would most certainly mean death. And so, with the ruins of humanity burning around them, and death most certain, Liz and Johann would face off against the Black Flame with everything they had. They would move in by submarine because the air was too thick, too dangerous. A multitude of enemies would come for them at first. They would all be destroyed by the cannon fire of a naval battleship providing them support. It was a slight win on their part, a calm before the eventual storm. There wasn't a flash when it happened, no warnings. No one saw where it came from, just the initial boom and a towering pitch black bolt. It struck the ship and broke it in half. Another struck their submarine, which caused all parties to disperse and fall into the depths below. Liz would submerge first, collecting herself from the attack that had just taken place. And as she recovered, she would look up to come face to face with Landis Pope descending upon the water. As iron is melted in the furnace, so shall you melt. I will pour my fury upon you, he said. His force towered over her, and he gave her the name of daughter. Not in a biological sense, but in the sense that he saw her as lesser, a false hope of light in an older, blacker storm. Liz and Johann began their assault. They crashed through buildings, raised oceans, and toppled bridges as their powers clashed and lit up the sky in a cacophony of fire, electricity, and blood. But even at full power, they weren't strong enough to take him on. His resurrection had given him power even beyond their own, but this wouldn't stop Liz from fighting to her very last breath. Johann did all he could, but the black flame managed to overpower him and damage his suit. As the black flame reveled in his victory, Liz gained every inch of strength she had left, while stating that if he won't go to hell, then she will bring the fires of hell itself to him. Suddenly, a mass of bright fire, greater than the black flame himself, crashed into the city and swallowed him whole. Liz reached through the fire and burned him from the inside out until his dark flames were no more. In the aftermath, the fires would subside and the smoke would clear to Liz standing before the charred remains of the once great black flame. Johann would join soon after, and in a fit of rage, he would smash the body into pieces before Liz had to calm him down. The battle had taken a toll over the both of them, but in the end, the black flame was finally defeated. Raymond Diestel and Landis Pope are two men that fell into the pits of true darkness, one through tragic pain and loss, and the other in a foolish attempt to seek knowledge beyond his grasp. In the end, the black flame, a god in his own right, king of monsters and storms, the black beacon of destruction, was nothing more than a stepping stone for an even darker universe.